I've got a fantastic book in my hand. It's called Chart Watch UK, Hits of 1989. It's written by friend and colleague here, James Masterton, so I'll lay that out there. But speaking absolutely objectively, it's definitive, it's exhaustive, it's fantastic. It seems to me to be pretty much every single artist, and certainly every charting single of those artists from that year, 30 years ago. It's Chart Watch UK, and we're talking 1989 and music and pop and chart trivia with James Masterton on talkRADIO right after this.
Can't get no sleep.
The Late Early Show.
An interesting foray into the weird and wonderful world of Paul Ross.
Thank you very much. On Talk Radio.
Well, what a year it was. It was 1989, the year the Berlin Wall came down. Emperor Hirohito died. There was a Tiananmen Square demonstration and then brutal crackdown. The Simpsons first aired 30 years ago, which is 1989. The Exxon Valdez tanker ran aground, and there was the very first successful liver transplant. Loads was happening in the world of current affairs, but even more was happening, probably more importantly to people like me, who love their music and love their trivia, in the charts. And I'm delighted to welcome back to Talk Radio. He's never really been away, because I'll be upfront about this, he's a friend and a colleague, he works here, but park that, because the book he's sent me, I've got it in front of me, you can get hold of, and you need it. It's called Chart Watch UK, Hits of 1989, and Mr. UK Chart is with us now. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Paul. Terrific to be here. I hope I live up to that kind of build-up.
Well, I'll tell you will, because we've spoken before, and this book is fantastic. I think it was that great writer Thomas Mann who wrote Death in Venice, who once said, only the exhaustive can be truly interesting. And this is exhaustive, because you've not just got the lists and the stats and all that stuff, you've got the stories behind the artists and the hit singles as well. How long has this taken you?
Far too long. Probably far longer than it should have done, really. But bearing in mind you have to do it in evenings and weekends around your usual job when you're a jobbing author like me. Yeah. It takes a fair bit of time, but it's a genuine labour of love, because when you love the topic, love the actual medium that you're working in, it doesn't feel like work at all.
And what's great is there's no snobbery in it at all. You cover everything from 1989, so it can be Stock Aitken Waterman, it can be Kylie or Jason or whatever. Also, some fantastic bands. Like, I know you mentioned the Happy Mondays, in it, because they began their breakthrough at that time. The Stone Roses, that kind of stuff. Do you have a favourite era of music?
Inevitably, it's the era you grew up in, and when you were a teenager, or certainly in your late teens. I know people who've got this theory that the music that was around when you were 19 is what defines your tastes for the rest of your life.
So it could be 19, Philip Hardcastle.
Theoretically, yes. I wasn't quite 19 in 1989, but it was the kind of the time when my love of popular music developed, which was why it's a good jumping in point to look at the history.
Now, you may well know James's voice because he's often on the radio. I've seen him on TV. He was in a documentary BBC 4 showed again recently, and Channel 4, talking about the charts, because you've been writing, I think, online, a weekly guide to the UK charts since, 92?
Since 1992. It seems a horrendously long time, but it means I'm probably in a unique position to having to tell the story of popular music, given I've lived through the whole thing. And again, it's another excuse to sit down and actually write about each individual songs as history pieces. It's one thing to review something as a contemporary piece of music, but to actually put it in context of how it slotted into popular culture, where it fitted into what, as you said, was what was going on with current affairs at the time. It all gives you the building blocks for quite a fascinating story. And
this has sent me back through my massive CD collection. I'm sure nowhere near as big as yours, because I'd forgotten, for example, that the Style Council had that kind of minor hit in 89, Promised Land, and that kind of led to them trying to go a bit dancey and then breaking up, effectively. So there's all kinds of fascinating insights into what was happening in popular music at the time. Is it possible to characterise that year? How would you, stepping back from 1989, kind of sum it up?
I think you can see the germ of the revolution that happened more in the 1990s. People look for 1990, 1991 as the era when there was this great revolution, this terrific fusion of dance music and rock music. But you can start to see that happen in 1989. I think I characterise it as the year that the alternative became mainstream. You start to see all these bands, all these acts that have been around for a number of years, Pop Will Eat Itself, Happy Mondays, as you mentioned, without much in the way of success. And then suddenly, almost out of nowhere, they're starting to have this major mainstream success.
So it's like the dawn of indie, precursors to Britpop, that kind of era.
Pretty much, yes. You can see the start of it there.
Well, he's picked out some great tracks we're going to listen to, only brief snippets, and then we'll have a chat about them. The first one you've chosen is a Donna Summer song, not one of her major hits, but I love Donna Summer's voice anyway, whether she's working with Giorgio Moroder or not, and this is I Don't Want to Get Hurt. So why have you picked out this one in particular? Because I say, folks, the book is fantastic. It's completely detailed, exhaustive, called Chart Watch UK Hits of 1989. Why this Donna Summer track?
This was a quite fascinating era for Donna Summer. She was signed to Geffen Records in America, having moved on from the Casablanca Records, where she'd been for most of her career. And she'd made an album in 1987 called All Systems Go, which hadn't actually done very well. And so it was the record label boss, David Geffen, that said, you know these guys, Stock Aitken Waterman in Britain, they had this massive hit single worldwide with Rick Astley. Go and work with them, see
Brilliant.
what they can do with you. And she went across to Britain and had the time of her life making this record. As far as she's concerned, it's one of the greatest things she'd ever done. The producers say she was one of the best artists they have ever worked for. It was just everything came together perfectly.
It's been a dream for Stock Aitken Waterman, because her voice is such a great instrument, isn't it, for them to play with in the studio?
They got to work with one of the great disco soul stars of her era. Yes, definitely. And so you can hear the joy that comes out of every single one of these tracks. I mean, this was actually the second hit single that came from the album. I always like to go for the ones that you wouldn't necessarily recognise and be over familiar with.
What I call major minors, major artists, minor hits.
That's it, yeah. And I mean, this is just a terrific, fun pop record, but being done by a very famous, very credible artist.
On the back of the book it says, and it's called Chart Watch UK, from Aha to Yellow, Kylie to Jason, Jive Bunny to Black Box, the definitive story of a year in pop, the hits of 1989. How can people get hold of this, James?
It's available on Amazon. You just search for it, and it's also available as an ebook wherever you can buy ebooks. So it's on Apple Books, it's on Google Play, it's also on the Kindle store as well. Essentially, anywhere you might want to pick up a book, you can get hold of it.
And the author is James Masterton. Track number 2 you've chosen is a Robert Palmer song called Change His Ways. Let's have a listen. There's a lot going on in that production, isn't there? I don't really remember that song. I do remember a bit after that, Robert Palmer tried to change his image with an album called, I think, Riding High, which was trying to go more Brian Ferry, crooning, lounges. Tell us the story behind this one then, James.
Well, you mentioned Robert Palmer to most people, and everybody immediately goes, oh, yeah, Addicted to Love. And in a way, it's such
Or as my dad always sang, addicted to pubs. That it wasn't funny the first time.
Or something rather ruder that John Peel said when he introduced it on Top of the Pops. But it's a great shame he is defined by this one song, because the thing about Robert Palmer is you actually couldn't define him, because he
worked
always
with Gary
tried to
Newman,
do.
didn't you, on one album with, I think, and also I love his song She Makes My Day. It's a beautiful ballad.
Again, that was from the same album as this song we're playing, and it's an example of how he tried to just hop between styles as much as possible. And I love this single because it's so quirky, so completely out there.
The yodeling, hang on, listen, the yodeling.
The yodeling.
That's brilliant.
It's got Cajun rhythms, it's got Zydeco in there. It's the last thing you would expect to find in a pop record.
Even sounds a bit of Diamonds on the Soles of His Shoes, that kind of Paul Simon Graceland album.
And also the fact that it's got this fascinating animated video as well, because it's the only animated version of a series of cartoons, quite adult cartoons, by this very famous Italian illustrator who Palmer was a fan of and wanted to incorporate that in the music.
See, that's what's great about this book, folks. You dive in and it's like going into a wonderful, a benign rabbit hole, because you never know where it's going to lead. Right now, though, it's leading us to, from 1989, Sir Cliff Richard. And out of fashion. He has got a fantastic voice. This was a bit of a departure for Sir Cliff, wasn't it, this one, James?
Most definitely. It is so easy to fall into the trap of going, Cliff Richard, well, he's this old naff guy, isn't he? But of course, for the longest time, he maintained this high-level credibility as a pop star. And 1989 was a pinnacle watershed year for him, because it was his 30th anniversary of in show business, and the record company counted up and realised, hang on, you've released 100 singles.
Wow.
So in the spring of the time of the year, he released the Richard Marx song, The Best of Me, which was his ceremonially 100th single. And this one we're playing at the moment was the follow-up to that, his 101st single, Just Don't Have the Heart, produced by Stock Aitken and Waterman, who transformed him into this Club Star. This, for the longest time, was the Cliff Richard single. It was actually okay to like because it's bouncy, bubbly.
Yeah.
It somehow fits in with the whole musical zeitgeist of the time. And it's actually forgotten, really, which I think is a great shame.
Well, that's the thing, because as soon as I heard it, I remembered it. But of course, at the time, even then, he felt a little bit crimply, a little bit naff.
Yes, that's
Until
right.
this came out.
And then suddenly everyone was like, hey, Cliff can hang with the kids.
Yeah. Now an amazing combo. Maybe not the single that people might think, but as you say, you like to pick the ones that charted but are slightly, maybe less well known. It's Soul to Soul and Get a Life.
Now what's the meaning of the line? Tell me. Well, it's like dreaming of your goals, ambitions. I'm feeling free. I'm on this mission to
Now, my son, for a while, he's still got a band. He's in his late 30s now, but he was an MC. And because his name's James and he's half Irish, you know, he's known in Ireland as Seamus, so he was MC Shameless. But in 1989, he was only 8 or 9 years old. He knew every word of this. It was just a fantastic thing to see him and his mates bouncing around doing the call and response. What is it about this one that kind of kept your interest, James?
I think if you're going to pick the defining sound of the summer of 1989, it was the sound of Soul to Soul, because their big hit single Back to Life
Back
was
to
on
Life.
every single radio, blaring out of every soft-top vehicle that was driving around the streets of every single
I had
city
an
at the time.
Escort XR3i.
Did you?
Lid
And you were
down.
playing Soul to Soul, were you?
Absolutely, Soul to Soul, and
Yeah.
you know, just all that kind of stuff. And every time when you get to the seaside, every amusement arcade you walked in front of was playing Soul to Soul.
They didn't. It was at their pinnacle. And I mean, Jazzy B is an incredibly inspiring individual. The man that started out running this sound system in Hornsey in northeast London, and eventually ended up as this mogul, this record producer, the man who was at the heart of this Soul to Soul collective. And he genuinely believed he was in a position to change the world, transform society through music, because all the money they were going to generate, he wanted to fund schools, fund hospitals, be part of a big community centre. It didn't quite work out that way because they weren't able to sustain the success. But 1989 was their big year. And
So
the song
they never really cracked America, did they, Soul to Soul, or did they?
That's not in any great sense, no. I think they had some minor success on the club charts in America, but certainly never in mainstream pop radio. And this was their big statement of intent for the end of the year. This was their Christmas single, and it was the perfect way to round off the year for them.
And of course, you've got in the back of the book, I notice, you've got the kind of bookies odds. This is how thorough this book is, folks, right? The bookies odds for what's going to be the Christmas number one. But I think the one that actually ended up as the Christmas number one wasn't shortlisted by the bookers because it was quite a kind of
Not at the
last
time,
minute
because
thing.
it was
wasn't
the last minute thing. This was the remake of Do They Know It's Christmas, the Band-Aid 2 version, or the Band-Aid single that history has forgotten, because when they did the 20th anniversary version in 2004, the 1989 remake was kind of airbrushed out of history as if it was, a bit of an embarrassment. But it's there as number one.
And that popped up recently as a almost pointless answer on the show Pointless. I think 2 people remembered it as being a Christmas number one. That was the category that it was Band-Aid 2. Do they know it's Christmas?
Quite terrific.
Okay, now a fantastic band to end on. Again, they've had their ups and downs. Not everybody's a fan. It took me a long while to get into U2 because I don't know why I just had an aversion to them until Achtung Baby and Zooropa came out. And then I looked back at their earlier stuff. But this is from 1989. It's a cracking song. This is U2's All I Want Is You. Actually, oddly, Roxy Music in the 70s had a single, different song with the same title, didn't they? All I Want Is You. Here's U2's song, though, All I Want Is You. More from James Masterton after this.
You say you want diamonds on a ring of gold. You say you want your story to remain untold, but all the promises we made from the cradle to the grave, when all I want is you.
Oh, boy, that's sublime, isn't it?
It's an incredible song, and if this was part of the opus of any other act, it would be considered one of their greatest ever hits, a ballad that was the pinnacle of their songwriting. But because it's U2 and they'd actually done so many others before and even after, this is actually kind of lost in the mix, which is a huge shame.
Because also a hit in this year, and I confirmed it by reading through the book, Hue and Cry had one of my favourite songs of all time, Violently. And this song, and Violently, I'd love Frank Sinatra to have recorded, because he worked with Bono, of course, on the Duets album, and they did a slightly interesting version of I've Got You Under My Skin. But imagine Sinatra singing this or singing Violently. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Terrific idea. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those songs that seems to be lost to history, and I'd love somebody to revive it. But this was a crucial year for U2, because this was arguably the point where they could lay claim to being one of the biggest bands in the world. Rattle and Hum, their current album at the time, was huge when it came out. And it's odd, really, because it's a strange hybrid, because it's part live album, part a collection of odds and sods, the semi-soundtrack to this road movie that they'd made of their journey to America. And this was just one of the songs of it. And the strange thing is, it's seen by the band themselves as kind of a point in time that they're not necessarily particularly proud of, because there was this genuine feeling that, we've steeped ourselves in Americana, lost track of who we are, lost touch with our roots.
And there was that accusation to that degree that they become kind of corporate rock prostitutes, if you like. There's a ruder word for it than that, but there was the feeling, people saying, you've sold out, because we knew new things were coming. We knew that, although we couldn't articulate, as you mentioned, the Mondays, the Stone Roses, and that new movement was on the way.
So they actually ended the year with these series of homecoming gigs at the Point Theatre in Dublin, right at the very end of December. In fact, the last of those was on New Year's Eve, which they made available for radio stations around the world to broadcast. But those concerts became quite notable simply because of the one, I think it was the night before the finale, where Bono stood on the edge of the stage right at the end and announced that they're going to have to go away and dream it all up again.
Wow.
And at the time, that was intense speculation. Is this going to be the end of U2? What are they going to do next? But it was a genuine expression of how they felt that they do have to go and work out exactly who they're going to be and what their roots are. And as a result of that, they created Achtung Baby a couple of years later, which ended up being one of their masterpieces.
But you can hear the passion and the knowledge in the man. That's James Masterton. The book's called Chart Watch UK, Hits of 1989. If you search for it on Amazon or wherever, you'll be able to get hold of a copy. And what's next for you then? Are we going to go through the years, or are you going to do 1999?
I am working on 1990 next. I think it's important to try and tell the story of popular music.
So that'll be 30 years next year?
That will indeed, yes. Hopefully I can get it all finished and get it out by then. But you'd be amazed at the stories there are to tell at that.
And let me give people an insight, if I may, into your personal life. Because when I saw you on the BBC4 documentary, talk us through your cassette tape collection and your chart countdowns.
Yes, this documentary that is repeated once every 6 months, it seems, on BBC4 was part of the filming of that. Where they got me to display to the camera this collection of tapes I had, where I used to religiously record the top 40 and preserve it every month or so. I do still have those tapes.
Why not?
I'm trying to digitise them as much as possible. But my lifelong obsession has been popular music and writing about the charts, which is why, as you said at the start, I've been writing this weekly column about the charts for about 25 years now. So if you go to my website, chart-watch.uk, you can not only read the very latest stories about the UK charts and what's number one this week and what might be number one next week, but also read the complete archive of everything I've ever written on the subject.
So that's chart-watch.uk, and the book's called Chart Watch UK, Hits of 1989, and James Masterton was a great guest for us live in the studio on talkRADIO. Cheers, James. We'll see you again very soon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Friend and colleague, it's now almost 1:45. After a bit of a break, we're going to be hearing from Ross Powell with a sporting roundup for us on talkRADIO.